Asante sana Wakili for joining us at GBS TV Africa Studios to have this conversation in line with the amendments that are being proposed to Article 37 of the Constitution that states that Kenyan citizens have the right to picket and demonstrate and present petitions to public authorities.
My name is Kevin O'Reilly, advocate for the High Court of Kenya. As you've heard, I practice law in our Kenyan courts, all the way from the tribunals to the Supreme Court. I major on constitutional human rights, but also do employment matters, civil, commercial, and all that pertains that. You can find me on my website. My law firm is Arende Oriri and Associates Advocate. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for also joining us at GBS TV Africa Studios. Now, we've seen that the Member of Parliament from Mbeere North has drafted a series of proposals to counter this allocation by the Constitution. And also in March, Kithure Kindiki, the CS for Interior, also proposed that the bill would be amended. Wakili, is it possible that the right to picket is going to be phased out, speaking constitutionally?
Thank you, Tracy. Happy to be here. The proposed bill, I've yet to see it. I'd be interested to look at it so that to familiarize myself with the particular provisions. But that being said, of course, there have been attempts by the state to, in my view, limit that right to assembly and the demonstration and picketing, to limit it as much as possible. Indeed, proposals had been made by the Minister for Interior sometime in March to come up with the regulations with respect to that right. The legislation in place as we speak is a Public Order Act. It's an extremely old act that, of course, has gone through a number of amendments. It does not fully provide for that right in terms of what the Constitution anticipates, but it has been good enough. From what I hear from the proposals that are being made by the Member of Parliament, Honorable Geoffrey, is to further limit the right. The Article 37 is quite clear that the right to assembly, picket, and demonstrate is a fundamental human right, and it can only be limited in terms of Article 24 of the Constitution, which is quite clear on what should be done, so that any law that is to be enacted that is inconsistent with those provisions then is null and void.
Okay, Wakili, so picking up from that background, we already have the Public Order Act. It's a 2003 Act, but it was revised in 2012. So we have the Public Order Act and we have the Constitution of Kenya. So which is supreme when we're looking at, or we're talking about these demonstrations? Because we've seen a wave of protests, and it's purported that the government is limiting this right. So what do we follow? Is the Constitution supreme as we think it is, or should we follow the Public Order Act? So between these two, which one actually stipulates the way to follow, or the procedures to follow when Kenyans are going to demonstrate?
Thank you, Tracy. The Constitution is supreme. Like I mentioned, any law, whether customary law, international law, or local legislation that is enacted that is inconsistent with the Constitution is null and void to the extent of that inconsistency. So the Constitution in Article 37 is pretty clear on the parameters around that right. The only qualification is that anybody an emotion or do so peacefully and unarmed. Article 24, which speaks to limitation of rights, is pretty clear that any limitation that is to be put in place by way of legislation must be aware of the nature of the right that is sought to be limited, such that the limitation must not be to the effect of making that fundamental right moot. The order and the nature of that right must be taken into consideration, such that, for instance, if you're talking about an amendment that makes it virtually impossible to demonstrate on subjects that are perhaps considered politically incorrect, then that is a limitation that goes outside the purview of what is anticipated by the Constitution. If I speak specifically to the Public Order Act itself, which is the law that is in place, Section 5 is what is relevant to regulations of gatherings and assemblies. It gives the demonstrator only has one role, that is to notify the police that they intend to hold a demonstration or an assembly or to picket, whatever it may be, within at least 48 hours. Once that is done, the police are expected to provide security and to cooperate with the conveners to make sure that that process goes on peacefully. So they have an obligation to protect the demonstrators, the conveners, and of course bystanders, motorists, and property owners. And most importantly, to avail that space. The only time that as per the law, Section 5, they can withhold that permission is if perhaps there was another event or demonstration that was to happen within that space. The law as well provides for, that is a Public Order Act, Section 5, powers for the police to either disrupt or prevent such a meeting if, in their view, it is likely to endanger public safety, public order, and so on and so forth. But the mischief that has been there, particularly with the Kenya police, is that with respect to even allowing that space for the public demonstration, they begin from the premise, or from a very wrong premise. If in most occasions this is for politically incorrect demonstrations or demonstrations or pickets that perhaps challenge the state, permission is rarely granted. Vague reasons would be given, undefined timelines, and after that, of course, the demonstrators, with the belief that they have that right under the Constitution, in most occasions they end up still turning up for the demonstration. And the final result would be a violent confrontation, of course, to the detriment of passers-by, motorists, and even the demonstrators themselves.
Now, Wakili, allow me to ask you the last question here. When you look at the Bill of Rights, Article 19, Sub-Article 3, it says that the fundamental human rights that are not granted by the state, so it is an individual, it is given to the individual and not granted by the state. So could we conclude, is it conclusive to say that we are going to have it's a gross violation of the Constitution against the people of Kenya? Because now if you decide that this amendment, you're going to make these amendments to stop or to limit how far Kenyans can go with the protests, is it a gross violation of the Constitution, looking at Article 19, Sub-Article 3 of the Constitution that says these rights are given to an individual and not granted by the state? Is the state trying to play the role of, let's say, God in making the Constitution?
That is very correct, Tracy. The same constitution prescribes that a fundamental right must be interpreted in the most expansive manner, because we bequeathed upon ourselves as Kenyans a very progressive constitution. We are a democratic nation, a multi-party democracy, founded on the national values and principles of governance in Article 10. Yeah. And those values include public participation, which underpins the right to protest, such that whatever happens in the political process, whether in parliament or the executive, the people, the masses must be involved.
Yes.
They must contribute towards that process in the easiest way possible. So the right to protest makes it quite easy. Yeah. It's a tool that is available to Kenyans easily to either communicate their frustrations or support for whatever policies the government is doing. And it is also connected to the right to freedom of expression, right to association. I mean, all these are connected. So when you try and limit it, then it means you are limiting the democratic space and violating the fundamental rights of the Kenyan people.
Asante sana Wakili for joining us. Thank you for that short and sweet interview about distinguishing between the Public Order Act and the Constitution of Kenya. Well, you've heard it. One of the key points to pick out is that the Constitution of Kenya is still supreme, and any law that goes against a constitutional provision becomes invalid. That's it for today.